Welcome to the Generation Gap. I'm Joyce Zohar, and I'm from the silent generation.
And I'm Karen Zohar, and I'm from Generation X. Joyce, you and I have known each other for quite a while now, haven't we?
We certainly have, Karen. You're my daughter. I've known you all your life. What is the generation gap? Well, I think it's the difference in attitudes, behaviors, values between older people and younger people. And Karen and I have found that these differences can often lead to misunderstandings and frustrations and
very interesting conversations, let's put it that way.
Very interesting conversations. So we, in these talks, would like to explore these differences, and perhaps as we understand each other a little better and we understand why we have these differences, perhaps we can come to better dialogues, more rational, more objective.
Build some bridges.
Build bridges, and we're going to try to do that.
So what's our topic for today, Mom?
Well, you know, I'd like to know, what are the roots of the generation gap? I've been thinking about it, and I think one of the ways we can explore those roots is look into differences in the way we were raised.
Oh, this should be interesting.
Well, listen, I am the product of parents who come from the Depression era. People in the Depression era were financially strapped. They were under constant stress. And that carried over even when that stress was relieved. For the rest of their lives, my parents were always very frugal and very conscious of spending money because they remembered what things were like when they were children, when the money ran out.
Is that why you were called the silent generation? Because they were so busy trying to manage their lives and put out these big fires that they just needed you guys to be quiet in the background?
No, I think it's more than that, Karen. I think that we were raised at a time when it was a more patriarchal society, a more hierarchical society, and children were at the bottom level of the hierarchy. Children should be seen and not heard. That, I think, originated in the time of Dickens, 50, 70 years before I was born, but it carried over. And the fact that our parents were so stressed, they really didn't have time for our problems. Our issues were considered extremely minor. You know, we were really not the priority.
Okay, so I understand what was going on in sort of a broader context, but I'm curious, what was it like growing up as a child in the 50s? What kind of toys do you remember? What types of experiences?
Well, it actually started, I'm pre-war. Actually, my third birthday was broken up by the attack on Pearl Harbor. My birthday happens to be December 7th.
That is so sad, Mom. Your third birthday?
Yes.
Did they have time to bring out the cake?
As I remember, well, I don't really remember. I was told that we were in the middle of the birthday party. The cake was on the table, and a neighbor knocked on the door and came in gasping, "We're at war, we're at war." And that broke up the party. And for the rest of my life, my birthday was never really celebrated because it was the day of infamy. So that's just a very personal thing that happened. But World War II had such an impact on my life because my early childhood took place during World War II.
Is that why you were such a good mom and you always gave me these really good theme birthdays? Like, I remember when you got a pony when I was 5. Is that because you got cheated out of it?
It's very possible, yes, Karen, because it was a combination of that carryover from my particular birthday and the fact that during wartime, all of that was considered low priority. I mean, people were in life and death situations. My father was sent to the South Pacific and he was gone for 4 years. My mother was left alone to raise me on her allotment that she got from the Army, which wasn't very much. So these were very stressful times for people. People were actually getting killed. I mean, fathers were going overseas and dying.
Yeah.
So issues like birthday parties and themes, this was very, very minor. I can even remember, I mean, I have vague memories, but I remember gold star flags hanging in the windows. I'm sure you never heard of that.
Is that for a family who's lost a member
Yes,
who's been
who
killed?
was killed in the war.
Yeah.
Gold stars, and there were, I believe it was silver stars or blue stars for those who were missing in action. So it was an extremely stressful time for the adults, and the children were really, you know, we were nurtured because we were so precious, but our particular needs were not priority.
That makes sense.
So, and that carried over after the war because, you know, you people probably don't realize that the Korean War broke out only 5 years after the end of World War II. So my whole early childhood experience was colored by warfare, fear, anxiety. I can remember the air raid sirens going off where we lived and the searchlights looking. I happen to live in the New York metropolitan area. So we were considered a target during World War II. I remember the searchlights scanning the skies for the enemy planes. And then later, when I got a little older and I was in early high school, we were worried about an attack by the Russians, a nuclear attack. We were trained to go under the table or go under a desk if we were at school and cover our heads, like that would have really helped.
Yeah, because that's going to help in a nuclear
but so
situation.
the overarching emotion was fear.
Yeah.
And that's how we were raised. It was a very fearful time.
You know, it's so interesting to hear you talk about that because I can't think of how I just, it's so different from the way I grew up. It's so very different. I was born in '65, and I grew up, my teenage years were in the '80s. So I graduated from high school in the early '80s, I graduated from college in the late '80s, and the '80s was a time of, well, obviously it's very complex and there were many things going on, but in terms of our country and the economy, it was a very prosperous time.
Yes.
A lot of companies had a lot of growth, there were a lot of jobs. There were increasing numbers of people going to college and getting jobs out of college. And we were very focused on our own lives at that time. I don't really remember, even though obviously as a student, a high school student taking history and going to college, we were aware of everything that was going on in the world and we understood that there were wars going on in different places, but it never felt like it was really impacting us in our day-to-day life.
Well, you didn't even have the draft. I mean, all my early years, my young married years when you were born, there was still a draft. I mean, young men went either to college and then into the service, or they went immediately into the service. And that colored everybody's thinking about the future.
Yeah.
Whereas in your time, it was a very optimistic time.
I mean, well, the boys my age did have to sign up for the selective service. Basically, they had to be in the database in case something happened, and they were called up. And it did cause us a little bit of pause, but nothing like what was going on when you were growing up.
You know, you have children. I have grandchildren. The grandchildren are all now young adults. And I'm a little concerned that none of them seem to be particularly interested in what's going on in the world today. Now, I know that there are active young adults who are politically active throughout the spectrum on both sides. But generally, my grandchildren, their friends, well, you taught high school up until recently. What was your experience? Is the youngest generation today politically interested, or are they more self-involved?
I don't know if there's a simple answer to that question, Mom. I would say that there are different groups of young people, and there's always a group that is very politically active and politically involved. And there are always groups that are not involved. Personally, neither of my children are particularly cognizant of what's going on.
Yes.
They're very focused on their own worlds. They're both in their 20s now. I can relate to that because that's kind of how it was when I was growing up in the 80s and even in the early 90s. Yes, there was a lot going on, but it didn't, you know, we had the Atlantic Ocean on the east and the Pacific Ocean on the west, and there was no internet, and we weren't instantly connected to everything that was going on. So there was enough of a delay that we could kind of get through the moments of our day without it being in our face.
It didn't have personal impact on
Yeah.
you, like the draft hung over,
Right.
you know, it was like a sword of Damocles hanging over all the guys in my high school class.
Yeah, and I have a hypothesis about this, and I don't really have anything to back it up. But in my humble opinion, I think one of the reasons why young kids today are not so focused on all the really difficult and challenging things that are going on in the world is that because we've changed to instant digital technology and being able to see what's going on everywhere at any moment and any time on the planet, it's so overwhelming and so disconcerting to their brains that they have to create some sort of bubble around them. Remember, the human brain is continually developing until it's 25, 26 years old. This is why we're so concerned about teens and young adults doing high levels of drugs like marijuana and other things when they're younger. There's no judgment on people using cannabis when they're older in their lives. It's legal and it's obviously not a problem at all. But for young minds, the brain is still developing, and if they spent all of their time trying to process what was going on in the world right now, it seems like it would make someone go crazy. So I want to give young people some grace right now.
Okay.
Just my opinion.
I like that, Karen, giving them some grace, because it annoyed me that my granddaughter didn't vote. You know, I'm not going to ask her how she would vote or who she'd vote for, just the fact that she didn't want to participate. But I think you're right. I have to give them some grace and maybe try to think back to when I was her age. Although I think we were more engaged than this generation seems to be.
We might have been, but also the spectrum of options, the choices we had of what we wanted to be engaged in was a lot narrower than what's going on. There are so many more things to pay attention to now. So ultimately, and again, children's brains are changing based on the way technology is interacting with them. And ultimately, I think that they're going to grow up to be incredibly resilient, and I have confidence that the next generation is going to inherit a world that's going to have incredible challenges, but they're going to have some really great solutions too. They're going to have new tools and resources. So I am cautiously optimistic. I always think that the next generation is able to do a little bit better than the previous generation because there's collective learning about what we haven't been good at in the past and how we can make things better. So I guess what I'm saying, bottom line, is I get that it bothered you that my daughters didn't vote in the last election. That being said, I'm confident that both of them are going to grow up to be engaged and productive members of society. It's just going to take a little bit longer. In my head, the 20s now are like what the teen years were when I was growing up, and the 30s are like the 20s. So many people are getting married much later, having children much later, and when you think about it, it really makes sense, because now it's our kids, it's pretty reasonable to think that they might live past 100.
Yeah, I hope they do. One of your children was actually born in 1999. If she lives past 100, she may actually span 3 centuries.
Isn't that
That's
amazing?
incredible to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
little bit of a pause here. We can edit this part out, and we can pick it up again. Well, Karen, you know, you had asked me earlier about what life was like when I was young, and I guess we got a little off the topic, so I'd like to go back to that a bit and talk about what life was like. Well, for one thing, we were a lot freer as children. You know,
Then who?
than your generation, and certainly the generation of young children today. Our parents told us in the morning, go out and play, and they didn't bother us all day, and come home for dinner. That's what we did. We went out, we found our friends, and we played. Well, what did that mean? It takes a lot to play all day, so we made up a lot of games. And there was a lot of creativity in the things that we did. We made up all kinds of games. I remember one called What's in the Refrigerator? And I'm sure you never heard of that one.
I have not.
Well, we had two groups of kids, a line at each end of an open area. And the idea was to reach the other line intact. Now, there was a person in the middle who called out products, things, vegetables, fruits, chairs, tables. They would yell out. You were able to start running until they yelled out the name of something. And if you ran when it wasn't something that could be put in a refrigerator, you were out of the game. That sounds a little complicated, but we understood it. You know, we 8-year-olds, this was no problem for us. And we played What's in the Refrigerator? We played more conventional things like jacks and kick the can and things of that nature.
I remember jacks with the little ball, and we had to pick them out.
That was a girl's thing, wasn't it? I don't remember any boys playing jacks.
I remember Miss Mary Mac. Did you?
No, we
didn't
didn't do that. We did jump rope. Did you do jump rope?
We did jump rope, but you know what? I was totally blown away by the people who could do double dutch.
Oh, we had some double dutch people. They were incredible. I could never do. Every time I tried it, I'd trip over.
There was
the rope.
even a song, the double dutch bus going down the street.
Oh, really? We didn't have a song. But we were very creative. We made up our own games. We had all day to be outside. We were free in another way, too. I remember on Saturdays, my girlfriend and I were each given a quarter, a nickel for the bus going there, a nickel for the bus coming back, a dime for the movie theater, and a nickel for candy.
Woohoo!
And the two of us, age 10, got on the bus by ourselves, went downtown Jersey City, which is where I was raised, and we went to the movies by ourselves, two 10-year-olds, and we took the bus home and came home, and that gave our mothers and fathers some free time to themselves without us. I can't imagine 10-year-olds being given some money for the bus or the subway or an Uber or a taxi and being told, you know, go to the movies.
I don't know. I mean, in some places, I think they still do that.
Maybe very small town America.
Yeah, or in very large towns. Kids that grow up in Manhattan, for example.
Oh, I don't know.
They may not be drivers, but they walk everywhere in the city.
Yeah,
and they
but
might
it's
walk
always
to
a
the movie
safety
theater.
issue in the big cities. You know, I don't know too many parents who let their kids walk up and down the streets of Manhattan freely at that age.
Here's an interesting point, because I get what you're saying, but what's different now, obviously there are always dangers, but what's different now is that we can track our kids in real time on their phone. I have a GPS on them, and I know exactly where they are at any moment. So back in those days, we used to worry about children getting abducted and kidnapped and being taken off into the ether and never being able to find them.
Yeah.
It's different now. We can track people in real time. So I think that does give us some level of safety and a buffer that we didn't have in the past. And along those lines, people also, with the Ring camera and with all of the video cameras, people can make their homes more secure now. because of the advancing
That's,
technology.
that's a very good point. So our younger grandchildren and maybe the great-grandchildren and so forth, they're going to be free like we were when we were kids.
Well, I think they're going to invent new ways. There are always nefarious
Yes.
groups that are trying to undercut the way that we want things to be done in an above-board way. So for example, now that kids have access to the internet on their phones, there are predators out there that may try to target young children in ways that they hadn't been able to reach kids before. So maybe it's a mix the other way, but I just wanted to point it out because from your perspective, you wouldn't be thinking about the new technologies that not only are protecting us, but also could be potential problems.
Yeah,
It's
that's very
changing
true.
pretty quickly.
That's very
I mean,
true.
the way you grew up is so different from the way I grew up, and the way I grew up is quite different from the way my children grew up because they grew up in a digital generation. I'm sort of, as a Gen Xer, I'm sort of in the middle where the first half of my life had no internet, and when I went to college in the 80s, there were no computers. I typed my papers by hand on a
On the Remington
typewriter.
Portable that I gave
There
you
used
when
to
you
be
went
a
away.
ribbon with a correct ribbon, and then when we got really fancy, there was the IBM with that little ball that would type. So I went through my whole college and my times of learning and becoming a teacher without the computer. And then when I became a teacher, there was no internet. And by the time I retired, it was like it is now, because it was, recently that everything is digital.
By the way, just as a little side note, you were still teaching during COVID, and I know that
Yeah.
that was quite a difficult time for you. Let me talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think anybody who was an essential worker had a really tough time in COVID. So yes, we teachers had a really difficult time, and I'll elaborate in a moment, but so did healthcare workers, the people in the hospitals, the people who were bringing food to the supermarkets, the police officers, the first responders, anybody that had to go out and do their job. It was incredibly difficult. But to share a little bit about what it was like to be a teacher, I remember there were days when I had to teach, and because they could only have a certain number of students in school, because you had to, it couldn't get too dense because we were worried about the spread of the virus. You can only have X number of students in school, and they had to be X number of distance apart, and we were wearing masks and whatnot. I would have half the kids in class, and half the kids were at home logging in on Zoom. The kids in the class are wearing face masks. I'm wearing a face mask. They can't even see my mouth move. And I have to teach to both groups at the same time, teach so that they see it at home, so that they see it at school. I'm having to assess whether or not kids are understanding, ask kids in my room questions about what's going on, and then I can't ignore the kids that are at home who quite often just had the screen on but maybe had another device that they were playing a game or something. So I had to make sure that I was asking them questions. It was, it was
Insane.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, it wasn't life and death, but it was absolutely impossible to be an effective teacher and to keep students engaged and to actually, inspire them to learn under those circumstances.
Karen, that was such a unique experience. That is going to color your relationship with your kids.
I think so.
Because you will always have in the back of your mind avoiding having to be in that circumstance again.
I think so, and I think my children will too. They were the COVID generation. They were in school during COVID, and my younger daughter went off to college freshman year during COVID. Yeah. So she had her freshman year in the dorm where they were online with their classes and they were wearing masks.
Yeah.
And really, we haven't had anything like that since since what, the influenza
Yeah.
breakout that happened in the late 20s, over 100 years ago.
I think that the whole COVID experience is going to be a watershed event in the future generation gap to come, because I don't think that the generations to come are going to really understand how difficult that time. It didn't seem like a long time. It was a year and a half that we had to deal with that. But it had such an impact on everybody. This is going to create a new generation gap.
I think everyone has their COVID stories. It was tough for everyone.
Yeah.
What people may not realize, and they may not know that my background is as a science teacher. I taught both biology and chemistry. So I was fascinated about what was going on with the COVID academic from a scientific perspective. Normally, when a novel virus rears its ugly head in the population, previous technologies, it took about 10 to 15 years to develop a vaccine. So imagine what we went through for several years, and imagine that had been extended to 10 to 15 years and we were still in a situation where we were isolated and wearing masks even now.
We wouldn't have done it.
It would be terrible.
People would not have done it.
But the good news is we had technology. We had this new RNA technology where we could sort of reverse.
Don't get into the details of that.
Anyway, we had new technology that we were able to roll out a vaccine that was safe and effective in about 18 months.
Yeah.
And that has never been done before. So I mention that for two reasons. Number one, that's really good news for us because that's not the first novel virus that's going to hit us this century. Well, it's the first one. It's the first one, but it's not going to be the last one. So we have to worry about this happening again, but at least the good news is that the technology will allow us to create the antidote or the vaccine more quickly. So when you say that this is going to be their defining moment, I absolutely agree with the caveat that their children may have another moment like this too, or their grandchildren. It's not like it's not going to happen again. It's happening more and more quickly.
Let's just hope it doesn't happen soon.
Fingers
Because we're
crossed.
still recovering from the last time.
Yeah.
I think we digressed a little bit from where we started
like to
about
talk
the
about,
roots
Mom?
of the generation gap. But actually, that's part of it because this is the roots of the new generation gap to come. I would like to talk a little bit about how these roots carry over into the way we view the world and the way it colors our vision of the world.
Okay.
You know, the very fact that my generation started off in fear, and in a way we're kind of ending in fear because of COVID, there's always been a lack of spontaneity with our generation that maybe your generation felt frustrated by. And
I don't know. I mean, I have to laugh because I think you're right in that. When I think of your generation, there was sort of a lack of spontaneity, but my generation was completely opposite. In the 80s, we had a lot of self-expression and a lot of spontaneity. When I think of all the John Hughes movies that came out in the 80s.
I guess the music was a lot
the
more.
music and the culture and the pop culture. I was very blessed to grow up during a time where I was allowed a lot of creative expression. And I actually think that is sort of tampered down a bit more even with my children's generation, only because we always say in our generation, we say, thank God the internet and Snapchat and Instagram wasn't around when we were teenagers, because it would have been preserved forever, because we did the same stupid stuff that they do now, but it wasn't preserved forever, ever. So I think that our children are less likely to even do it in the first place because they're worried about.
Well, in other words, the things I didn't know, I shouldn't know, and I'm glad not to know.
I think that's a good place for us to end here today, Mom. And I think it's really interesting that because we grew up differently, it really has informed how we look at the world, and it's very different between our generations.
Absolutely. Well, if you have any input on this, we'd love to hear from you. Some recollections you may have about how you were raised, how it informed the way you raised your children. Please feel free to contact us. Karen, how can they?
You'll see an email on our screen. Reach out and we'll be happy to get back to you. Thank you.